Okay, so I want to talk about one more objection to utilitarianism and Mill's response to it. And this is actually one that pops up in a lot of forms, but I'm only going to focus on one way it pops up because I think it will be important when we're thinking about utilitarianism versus Kantianism as well as virtue theory, which we'll talk about later in the semester. So a utilitarian says that happiness is all that matters. And remember, they have their own specific definition of happiness. Happiness is pleasure in the absence of pain. Is happiness really all that's valuable? Is it really all that makes someone's life go well? Is it really all that we care about? And so Mill, to his credit, distinguishes between two different claims. Happiness, pleasure in the absence of pain, is a good thing. Happiness matters. Pleasure makes our lives go better, pain makes our lives go worse. Second claim is that happiness is the only good thing. The only thing that matters. Pleasure is the only thing that makes our lives go better. Pain is the only thing that makes it go worse. Is this true? Don't we value some things, don't we want some things that won't make us happy, right? You know, somebody might want to get a degree, but, it might be a long, stressful road to getting their college degree. If all they cared about was pleasure, why would they do that? Well, here's what Mill will say. Think of anything people want. They want it for either two reasons. Either they think it's pleasurable, or they think it'll lead to something that's pleasurable. Or they think it'll spare them some pain, right? You go to the dentist not because it's pleasurable, but because it will keep you from feeling the pain of having a cavity, right? Or losing a tooth. You might go on a diet not because it's pleasurable itself, but because it'll lead you to being in better health, which is pleasurable, right? And will prevent pain. Anything people might want, anything they might find valuable for themselves, is because it either makes them happy, leads to pleasure, or prevents pain, or because it leads to something that will make them happy, indirectly. Now we'll come back to this. I want to put a lot of pressure on this claim when we get to virtue theory. Are there things in our own life that we might find valuable for reasons besides a connection with pleasure and pain, or over and above that? But here's the objection I want to think about today. And I'll think about this throughout the semester. This will come up with both Kantianism and virtue theory. Don't we value virtue, that is, good moral character, for its own sake? If people are courageous or generous, or if somebody does a morally good thing at great cost to themselves, don't we find that valuable beyond whatever link it has to pleasure in the absence of pain? And Mill says, no, we don't. We value virtue because it is likely to lead to the greatest happiness. If other people are brave or generous or kind, they will likely do things that lead to the greatest happiness. Not only will they more reliably do things that lead to the greatest happiness, they will enjoy doing them. Virtue is good. Good character is good because it is a thing that generally leads to the greatest overall happiness. So that's why each of us should develop a good character, and we should encourage others to develop a good character. Here's the problem, though. What about cases where acting virtuously has bad consequences, where doing something we would think stems from good character has terrible consequences. And I'll just give you guys one example. Klaus von Stauffenberg was a German officer who tried to kill Hitler. There was a larger conspiracy. He wasn't the only guy involved, but he took kind of the lead in this, and he is the one. He went into a meeting with Hitler. He carried a briefcase that had a bomb in it. Von Stauffenberg left the briefcase. He made an excuse, left the meeting early. And the bomb would have killed Hitler. Von Stauffenberg put it near Hitler. It would have killed him. But somebody at the meeting kept bumping into the briefcase where the bomb was. It was in their way. So they actually moved it over and put it behind this really heavy table leg. Further away from Hitler, behind the table leg, the leg actually absorbed a lot of the blast. It was further away. It really didn't even hurt Hitler all that badly. I think it ruptured his eardrums. Now look, von Stauffenberg was a very brave person. And he tried to kill Hitler for what most of us would think are pretty noble motives, right? He had seen what the Nazis were doing. He had seen the Holocaust. He had seen the bad treatment of POWs. Holocaust being the big one, but, also just the way the German army treated the Russian POWs was terrible. They were murdering Jews. They were also murdering Poles and Russians. Von Stauffenberg saw this and he was horrified, right? He had kind of indifferent feelings about Hitler to begin with. Von Stauffenberg was conservative from a conservative family. And at first he thought, well, I don't know how I feel about this guy, but maybe we can make our peace with him. But once the war started, just aghast at what he was doing, right? There's no possible way this could be justified, right? And von Stauffenberg thought, well, not only is this terrible, it's just a stain on the honor of my country, right? This is a stain on the honor of Germany and the German military. And von Stauffenberg thought that something had to be done. And his conspirators felt the same way, right? We need to do this because somebody needs to at least try to stop this. And von Stauffenberg and his conspirators thought that it had some chance of working, right? They thought maybe we can kill Hitler, maybe we can launch a coup and sideline the other Nazis, and we can stop the Holocaust. We can maybe even try to reach a peace with the Allies, right? But von Stauffenberg thought the odds were long, right? And so did most of his conspirators, right? This might work. We might kill Hitler. We might be able to launch a coup if we do and take over and stop this. But this was not guaranteed, right? But von Stauffenberg thought, we have to try this. Just for the historical record, just some way of salvaging the country's honor, just because somebody needs to at least try, right? Von Stauffenberg very well knew this might not work, that it probably wouldn't work. And his conspirators knew this too. And it didn't work, right? It didn't work. And not only did it not work, but it had terrible consequences. Stauffenberg and his conspirators were all killed. Stauffenberg, at least, they gave the dignity of like a firing squad. But a lot of the conspirators were killed in nastier ways, right? These people were murdered. And you might say, well, look, these were all honorable, good people. If they had lived out the war, wouldn't it have been good for everybody if these people could have taken part in the reconstruction of Germany? They could have contributed if they hadn't been murdered. And not only did Hitler kill von Stauffenberg and his conspirators, he went on just a murder spree of other political prisoners. The theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer was murdered because Hitler went on this spree of killing political prisoners because he was so angry about the assassination attempt. Bonhoeffer had nothing to do with the attempt, so did most of the other political prisoners he had murdered, but he was just angry and wanted to take it out on somebody, right? And a lot of these people were killed in bad ways, right? They hanged Bonhoeffer with piano wire, I think. It was piano wire some other way, but he was hanged, slowly suffocated, a very nasty way to die, right? And you might say, well, look, if von Stauffenberg hadn't tried to kill Hitler, a lot of these political prisoners might have lived through the war. Von Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators might have lived through the war. It seems that, like, the attempt to kill Hitler had mostly bad consequences, even if it sprung from the virtues of character of von Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators, right? And this actually, a lot of other truly virtuous or heroic actions might have nothing but bad consequences. Don't we still admire them? Don't we think, even if this has terrible consequences, this was a good thing? If we think that, then we disagree with Mill. We do think there's something of value to virtue or good behavior over and above the fact it tends to lead to happiness. Now, what a utilitarian might say, and they might say, well, in the short term, von Stauffenberg's actions had, bad consequences, but in the long term, he's an inspiration to people, so on and so forth. I don't know. It's also worth noting that von Stauffenberg certainly didn't think in utilitarian terms, right? The things that von Stauffenberg cared about, his nation's honor, the honor of the German military, that wouldn't register for a utilitarian. It's like, who cares about that, right? The things this guy cared about were not the things that a utilitarian puts all the emphasis on. Yes, he wanted to stop the killing. Yes, he wanted to stop the war. Yes, he cared about the consequences, but that wasn't the main thing. That wasn't the driving force. Anyway, this leads to an argument against utilitarianism. Suppose we valued virtue and virtuous behavior only because it generally leads to the most happiness. Then virtue and virtuous behavior are bad when it leads to unhappiness. If virtue and virtuous behavior bad when it leads to bad consequences, unhappiness, then von Stauffenberg's actions were wrong. It was wrong. It was a bad thing to do for him to try to kill Hitler. His actions were not wrong. So we do not value virtue and virtuous behavior only because they generally lead to happiness. We value something else besides happiness, right? 6, that means we must think that virtue and virtuous behavior have value beyond the fact that they tend to lead to the most happiness. And if we believe 6, then we've rejected this strong utilitarian claim that happiness is the only good thing. Now, again, the utilitarian will try to avoid this. He'll say, well, we got to think of the long-term consequences, and with the long-term consequences, maybe von Stauffenberg's actions indirectly created a lot of happiness. He's a hero. He's inspired people. Even if in the short term it just led to a lot more people getting killed. So maybe 4 is not true. That's how they'll try to avoid this argument. I'm not sure how successful that is. And if they can't avoid this argument, well, that's a problem for them, right? There's a lot of other examples of ordinary Germans resisting the Nazis, usually only accomplishing getting themselves killed. Hans and Sophie Scholl are another good example. Very brave. They passed out pamphlets trying to let people know what was going on in Munich. Of course, they were arrested. They were killed. And in Sophie Scholl's case, she could have probably gotten herself out of it. She just kind of had to, confess and say she was wrong. She didn't do that. And a utilitarian, it seems like, would say, well, yeah, she should, then she can survive and live through the war. But out of personal integrity, she wouldn't. And again, that seems like something a utilitarian cannot say is the right thing to do because it does not lead to the best consequences, to the most happiness. That seems to be a problem for utilitarian theory.